All right. Hello and welcome, and everybody. It is a beautiful Wednesday afternoon in mid-Missouri. This is the 9th episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I am Blake Wallace, your host, joined by my co-host and great friend, Jake Aaron.
Hello, hello.
In today's show, Jake and I go over a tidal wave of free agency in the NFL. Who won free agency? And who did it? That is right around the corner. Our own mock draft is soon to debut, but today, and a lot of the things that are changing this week are going to make us have to make improvements on that NFL draft coming up your way. Next, we take fans to Saturday night in Miami, where Dustin the Diamond, Poirier, and Suga Sean O'Malley came away victorious and in fantastic fashion. Finally, the Blake and Jake Show saves the best for last as the Mizzou Men's Tiger team rounded out their conference play completely winless, 0-18. Only one other SEC team in the modern era has ever done this. The 2018-2019 Vanderbilt Commodores. Now, we're going to compare those teams and ultimately decide who had the better winless team. Was it the 2018-2019 Commodores, or was it this year's Mizzou Tigers? Just a little bit of fun there to round out this episode. Think you know who has the better team? Stick around and hear all the evidence for yourself at the bottom of the hour. You can find the Blake and Jake Show on Spotify and YouTube at the Blake and Jake Show. And if you want to follow around on Instagram, that is the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. Jake, go ahead and take it away with the sports news update.
Thank you so much, Blake. Former Notre Dame quarterback Drew Pine transfers to Missouri. Though he won't compete with Brady Cook for a starting job this year, Pine expects to be the lead candidate when Cook leaves Mizzou. Pine didn't play last season, but he's been working out 5 days a week with a trainer. He'll come to Mizzou with 3 years eligibility left.
Yeah, everything I hear says that Drew Pine has a real chance to be competing for that starting job, not this year, but next year. And what a great backup for Brady Cook this year. So I like the move for Mizzou. I like the move for Drew Pine. It seems smart getting in there right behind a great quarterback and trying to carry on the condition.
Yeah, moving on. There have been many NFL signings over the last few days. I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but I'd like to highlight just some of the biggest deals. Excuse me. So Kirk Cousins signed with the Falcons, Saquon Barkley signed with the Eagles, Josh Jacobs signed with the Packers, Derrick Henry signed with the Ravens, Russell Wilson signed with the Steelers, and Christian Wilkins signed with the Raiders. Blake, outside of Kirk Cousins, which one of these signings will make the biggest impact with their new team?
I really liked Wilkins to the Raiders because the Raiders have seemed kind of rudderless for some time. Now they've got Pierce, their new head coach, and he goes out and gets himself a defensive player, a defensive stopper right there, and that's what stops the runs there for that team. That defense is going to be Wilkins now at that tackle position, and that just allows them to work from there to stop the run. Now you get to worry about stopping the pass, and on offense, making your run team just a little bit better than your opponents. It all starts with stopping the run first, and I think that's what the Raiders were able to do. And despite it being a pretty hefty contract, it's one that is solid for both parties.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. Moving on Saturday, Luka Doncic became the first player in NBA history to record 6 straight 30-point triple-doubles, breaking Russell Westbrook's streak of 5 consecutive 30-point triple-doubles. Against the Bulls on Monday, Luka finished with 27 points, 12 rebounds, and 14 assists in 3.5 quarters, which ended his streak. But Blake, my question for you is, what more can Luka Doncic do to individually sway your MVP vote in his favor?
That's a great question because the numbers are off the charts, but the numbers have been off the charts for the last few years. So what more does Luka have to do to win an MVP? And you look at some of the people who have won the MVP in the last few years, whether it be Giannis or even more so Jokic, who will likely win again this year. And so you use that as your measuring stick right there. The difference is the wins. I mean, both Giannis and the Bucks and Jokic and the Denver Nuggets, they've been both highly successful on highly successful teams. Now, right now, Luka Doncic has crossed off the part about being highly successful. Now, can he do it on a highly successful team? It likely has to go by Doncic in this medium. I don't see that as being capable for this year, getting into that MVP race. It's up to Luka and the rest of that coaching staff to figure out how to get him into the MVP race next year, because simply put, his numbers are MVP level.
Right, the numbers are, but the wins are not at all. So hopefully, if not this year, as a Mavs fan, hopefully next year they can get those wins up and get him more in the conversation.
And that is Jake with the sports news update. Thank you so much, Jake.
Of course.
And also moves us into our very first topic of the day: who won and who lost free agency. Now, there's going to be quite the opinions out there, and I expect those. So we're going to go ahead and start with one of the bigger deals of the week, and that is Kirk Cousins. $180 million, $100 million guaranteed to the Atlanta Falcons. This makes him the second highest paid quarterback in total earnings over a career. And ironically, I think he could top one, because this deal is great, but it possibly leaves room for another quarterback deal if Cousins is able to stay healthy. But I continue. Kirk Cousins was the belle of the ball for this year's free agency period. The Vikings obviously wanted him back, but Atlanta Falcons had a little bit more to give and were willing to go a little bit more out of the way, which is interesting because Kirk Cousins is coming off an Achilles injury. A few years ago, that might have deadened any free agency interest coming from any team of a 30, 35-plus-year-old quarterback. But now, just a few years removed, that is no problem for any of these NFL teams. It felt like that was just a footnote in the Kirk Cousins discussion. And, of course, I don't think that Kirk Cousins is the only one that won out of this. The Atlanta Falcons, previously running with Desmond Ridder, was not a starting quarterback in the NFL. In fact, the NFC South was home to the worst group of NFL quarterbacks of any division, and Desmond Ridder was the worst in their division. So certainly a need for Atlanta over really any other team in the NFL. That's why they're willing to give just a little bit more than every other team. This allows them now to attack a weaker division. That's why this is so powerful for Atlanta Falcons. And also, now that eighth pick is freed up, there is no interest in using that for a quarterback anymore. It frees them up to go get a playmaker that'll help them right now, whether that's on the offensive end. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and hint. I guessed that Kirk Cousins would be going with the Atlanta Falcons on our mock draft. I had Rome Odunze going to the Atlanta Falcons as kind of a 1-2 punch that they could get in. Now, I know Darnell Mooney and a very good receiver from Chicago goes to Atlanta as well. I don't see them exactly pulling out of that need. Rome Odunze is a totally different wide receiver and one that could add a new aspect to that Atlanta Falcons team. But maybe they go out and get a pass rusher too. They could probably get the best, if not the second best pass rusher on the board at that number 8 spot there. And that'll move us into our second one, the losers. And this one's going to hurt me just a little bit here, but it's without a doubt the Denver Broncos. We're just going to go through a list of their releases, and then we'll talk about their acquisitions. Release Russell Wilson, Justin Simmons, their center from LSU, Lloyd Cushenberry III, Josie Jewell, that will be signing with the Cardinals on a 2-year deal. It's not looked good and really haven't gotten anything in return. There was a safety from the Dolphins and a defensive tackle, but I mean, right now, there are multiple teams with no additions in the first 48 hours of free agency. I didn't pick any of those teams because none of those teams are paying $38 million to not have a quarterback in the room. It's going to be tough sledding for Denver, just recollecting all of the talent that they've let go in the last few years and coming back with a little something new, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, they're like you said, they're down $85 million just to not have Russell Wilson. They don't really have a top quarterback in line for next season. Well, they do have a draft pick. That'll hopefully come in handy for them. But I would not want to be a Broncos fan right now.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the few teams that are struggling with cap issues while also struggling with not having enough skill at least 10, 11, 12 positions on their roster to really create a competitive team, and that's in one of the worst divisions, the AFC West, which is only getting tougher. We talked about the Raiders and what they're doing and what they're building over there in Las Vegas. That moves us into a winner. We need a winner because that was quite depressing. And that moves us into the running back market, which got a well-needed rain this year. The state of the running back market has been a fascinating problem with seemingly no real answer. The NFL boosting the cap, though, up $30 million from last year, may have just been that answer that nobody found, as it seems like these teams are willing to flirt a little bit more with going out and getting some better talent at the running back position, taking a little bit of risk, putting a little bit more down in that money guaranteed portion, and coming out with some big big turnouts, and that's really what it's been. We've been wondering what is it that takes this running back market into we're gonna kind of skim it a little bit to now we're gonna fully invest because nobody else is. It feels like a few teams said, hey, we get $30 more million to work with this year. Let's put it into that market. It certainly has done. What was your favorite pickup from that running market trade there?
Ooh, my favorite pickup for the running market? I'm not too sure, but I just want to throw out a number here real quick. So there have been 13 running backs who've signed a deal so far, and they've gotten a total of $200 million. The 13 running backs who got paid most last season were made a total of $102 million. So it's safe to say that the running backs are winners so far in this free agency.
That's astronomically different from where it was last year and previous years before that. And I've got to say, I really like Saquon Barkley to the Eagles. It's in division, so it's nasty, it's dirty, but he's also just has so much left in the tank. Some injuries have kept him aside, but Philadelphia Eagles should be maximizing that talent next year. That brings us into our final loser of the free agency period. It's another team. It's the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers haven't made terrible free agent moves. They've invested in 2 guards. I've liked both of the guards. Robert Hunt gets $1 million, 63 guaranteed. That's huge. It's a little bit too flamboyant for me. Yet Damian Lewis, that's a great pickup there with 53 million, 26 guaranteed. There's not a lot of top-end talent in the NFL draft for guard positions. Now, can you move a few tackles into the guards? Yes, you can. Yet, when we're talking about just pure guards, there just wasn't a lot here. So a lot of these teams you could see kind of decided to go ahead and invest in that in the free agency market rather than the NFL draft. I think that's a clever move. And I had Carolina as one of the neediest for any offensive line members, but specifically a guard. But letting go of Brian Burns, going to New York Giants for a 4th and a 6th round pick. They let a wide receiver go to Chicago and got nothing in return. And, of course, they don't have their 1st round pick this year because that is also Chicago's. They just haven't done a great job of giving themselves these high-value assets and using them because Brian Burns was a high-value asset last year. Their wide receivers were high-value assets, and that 1st round pick, it's a high-value asset. They gave it up for Bryce Young. Now they're trying to make it all work. And simply put, firing a coach every year or two has not really been a healthy, successful venture for the Carolina Panthers. They're simply in it this year. They paid for the guards. It seems like maybe kind of getting a little bit of their mind right, understanding we're going to protect our quarterback, maybe go after and get some people that are going to go after your quarterback in the NFL draft. Yet, they put themselves so behind the 8 ball, that just makes them a loser of the free agents period in my book.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. With their 2-15 record, last year, they don't have that 1st round pick like you said. And I know hindsight's 2020, but it was reported that they apparently turned down 2 1st round picks last year for Burns from the Rams, which means that they didn't get as much as they could have.
Yeah, that's on the front office of the Carolina Panthers, and yikes. All right, that moves us into our very first commercial break. Thank you so much for listening to the Blake and Jake Show. It's been an absolute honor. On the other side of this break, we talked UFC. Suga Sean, Dustin Poirier, both were spectacular, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what is next for those 2 fighters on the other side of this quick break. All right, you've waited long enough. It is time to bring out the second segment of the Blake and Jake Show. And this is recapping some of the awesome, and spectacular fights we saw on Saturday night. Sean O'Malley won in fantastic fashion Saturday night in Miami. I enjoyed the Michelle Pereira dance before finishing the opponent just a minute in. But from that moment on, there was a feeling in the arena. It's only a matter of time before O'Malley takes the show to a level that only O'Malley could. The fight reminded me of just 3 years ago when O'Malley fought UFC debuting Chris Moutinho. So I went back and I checked the fight. I checked that fight versus this fight versus Chito Vera, and I found that Sean O'Malley connected 230 times in the fight versus Moutinho. 177 of those punches landed on Moutinho's face.
Wow.
O'Malley dominated a fight. There was really no question about that. In this fight, O'Malley connected 232 times. Now, Chito landed just 89 strikes. That's 20 more strikes in 10 minutes of fight time than Chris Matinho was able to land. So 20 more strikes, but 10 more minutes to work. So it was pretty much the same fight. And what I like to tell everybody is Sean O'Malley has made everybody look like a Chris Matinho sometime in their fight, whether it be Aljamain Sterling in just a quick, round in a minute or so, or Peter Yan even. At some point, Sean O'Malley just was so clean, so perfect, so technically advanced that he was able to stay ahead of any of the competition. Furthermore, haters of Sean O'Malley have been talking too much about his legs. 34 Cheetos, 89 strikes were leg kicks. O'Malley looked fine. We have seen this sort of dominance before at this level. I would entertain comparisons to Max Holloway in the way that he managed his fight with his elite footwork and speed. Max Holloway was also fearless, took on any challenge, even fighters bigger than him like McGregor and Poirier. He still does. He fights Justin Gaethje at UFC 300. I don't expect that one to go too well for him. But the key to beating, and I put quotations around key, beating Holloway early in his career was to out-wrestle him and negate the stand-up. Now, this was more because of what Holloway could do on his feet than his weaknesses on the ground. But right now, O'Malley is kind of in that same exact area where the only weakness that critics have of O'Malley is that he hasn't faced a strong wrestler. Now, back to the present. Dana White, the UFC matchmakers, and Sean O'Malley are now in talks about what is next. The first option on the table, and the fight most needing to happen for the division, is Merab Dvalishvili. He's not going away anytime soon, and as long as he keeps blasting every fighter with 30 takedowns, he will be viewed as O'Malley's boogeyman. Merab's 10-fight win streak and release from UFC brass's purgatory has made him the likely push for the UFC. Merab also represents the toughest style matchup for O'Malley. It should be pointed out that Merab has been making his name among the veterans of the division. A fight with O'Malley would be a breath of fresh air after fighting mainstays like Jose Aldo, Peter Yan, and Henry Cejudo in his last outings. In fact, Merab's last defeat was against a young guy in Ricky Simone, 2018. That was right before he rattled off 10 straight to be where he is now. Now, next to UFC commentator Joe Rogan, Sean O'Malley called out Ilia Topuria, the champion of the featherweight division. I see the matchmakers pushing this option off the table at all costs. Ilia Topuria has just begun his reign. It's one probably of immense terror. I've seen Topuria in his very first fight in the UFC, and I was like, immediately, that's a champion. He's able to do it all. He does it fiercely. He makes everybody kind of get chills. His finishes aren't exactly always entertaining as much as they are just, they send a shiver down your spine. Now, the thing is that Ilia has not been able to defend his belt yet. O'Malley has just defended his belt once, has a plethora of challengers awaiting in the bantamweight division. Corey Sandhagen is once again risking his spot in line for the title against Umar Nurmagomedov with a bid for the belt likely the outcome. In fact, I believe that Corey Sandhagen said he's only going to take the fight if the winner is guaranteed a spot at the title match in their next fight. I think that's very fair, by the way. Davidson Figueiredo, a former champ, fights at UFC 300 as well, and will have his eyes on gold in the new division. This fight has money all over it, Topuria versus Suga Sean. But risking holds this fight for the future. It could really pay off big for the UFC. They just have to wait, and this fight just builds and builds and builds over time. Fight makers know this fight is a home run with just a little bit of time. The third option for Sean O'Malley, it's not super fun, it's not super exciting, is Peter Yan. The UFC cannot wait for the winner of Umar versus Sandhagen. Their fight comes down to a split decision versus... Sean O'Malley and Peter Yan came down to a split decision. And the other losses of Peter Yan were to Merab and Aljamain Sterling, and both of those were by decisions as well. So Peter Yan is not out of this title picture by any super large means. He's right on the outside of it. If Merab is unable to enter the cage opposite Sean O'Malley, a Suga Sean O'Malley versus Peter Yan rematch could be on the horizon. All right, we're going to stay on the topic of results of 299, but we're going to talk Dustin Poirier, who came away victorious despite being a decent-sized underdog versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Poirier has been trading wins and losses since his conclusion of the McGregor saga. There was a looseness in Dustin Poirier on Saturday night, coming in as the substantial veteran of the two. I don't know if there's a better inside boxer in the UFC than Dustin Poirier. It felt like every time that the fight would just kind of get into a certain close, nitty-gritty range, it felt like Dustin was defending almost effortlessly and then beaming Saint Denis with some massive counter punches. When we're talking about the two fighters standing in the pocket, pairing and trading blows, there's just nobody like Poirier. It felt to me that Saint Denis kept getting sucked into that range and would try to plant and trade and land that big shot, but Poirier would simply flow from movement to movement until he saw an opening, and then he would strike. Now the path is clearer than ever for Poirier, and it hasn't been that way in some time. The craziness of the McGregor fights are behind him. Rock bottom came courtesy of Justin Gaethje's head kick. And now Poirier has the confidence from turning back one of the UFC's hottest young prospects. Poirier now is in the best seat in the house to fight his way back to contention in the lightweight division without the pressures of before. A fight versus Matisse Gamrot, who also fought on UFC 299, or Armin Sarukian after UFC 300's outcome could fit Poirier's ambition for UFC gold next, while possible rematch versus Charles Oliveira could be a UFC level moneymaker and another guaranteed barn burner. I'm going to go ahead and ask you here, Jake. Poirier has some interesting choices in the wings. Would you like him to see him turn back another prospect like Armin Sarukian or Matisse Gamrot, who both can offer just these absolute dangers as up-and-comers, or does he fight Charles Oliveira in a rematch? And their first fight was epic, and this fight could be another epic matchup here.
No, I want to see a rematch. Watching that UFC 299 was the first time that I saw Poirier fight like live, and man, that was so exciting. I want to see a rematch. I like rematches. So I think it would go well. Just at least for the fans' perspective, it would be a really interesting fight.
Yeah, I'll be honest. The fight that turned me from a general fan of the UFC to just full-born, I'm all in, is Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. And for that exact same reason, the same poetry that you saw on Saturday night, that's what I felt so many years ago. And I can remember the night. I can remember the moments. I can remember the feelings. Poirier elicits those feelings, unlike really any other UFC fighter in any of the divisions, because the way he fights, it's so clean, but it does have such a technical brilliance and beauty to it. It's spectacular. Now, I've got to say, I'm a little more 50-50 on that proposition. I think Armin Sarukian is a loss on anybody's record because he's just too terrifying. I think Matisse Gamrot could get him a little bit of that name, especially after beating Dos Anjos and 299. That could be a big step up for either fighter. And it's not a step up per se for Poirier, but it's not necessarily a step down, because a win over Dos Anjos is a huge thing to put on your resume there. So Matisse Gamrot, he's not just a nobody here in this fight anymore. But then again, I see your interest in Charles Oliveira, and I think those matchmakers see an interest in Oliveira as well. I want to go back up and talk a little bit more about Sean O'Malley, though. I kind of breezed through that section there. Go ahead and tell me, what were your thoughts about Sean O'Malley on Saturday night? And really, just give me any thoughts. Who would you like to see him next? Yeah,
O'Malley looked so dominant throughout that fight. He didn't win by a knockout, but after the second round, there just wasn't a doubt in my mind. I knew he was going to win this fight. He fought, like he's the champion. He fought like the champion. It seemed almost like he was in a completely different league than Chito Vera. You mentioned the significant strikes. He had the third most significant strikes in a title fight and the most in a UFC bantamweight title fight. He was just so dominant, so electric. It was fun to watch.
I talked about all the ways that Sean O'Malley got better, but I didn't really get to talk about his gas tank, because against Peter Yan, it was a 3-round fight, but Sean O'Malley was completely gassed at the end of the 3 rounds. he answered so many questions in that bout. I don't think that people were too bothered by it, but it was something, a little bit of concern going into his next 5-round fight. Now you see him 5-round fights. It was a breeze for him. He got shot. He got hit with that body punch right at the end there. Otherwise, I don't think he would have been on the canvas breathing hard at the end of that 5th round. He kept a good pace throughout each of the rounds. Every time it felt like Cheeto was throwing a lot of power, trying to get back in that fight, then it was Sean O'Malley, the footwork and the pressure and the fakes that just was able to put Cheeto back in his place time and time again. All right, that goes ahead and finishes our second segment. We have one more segment in the books for you today, and that one's probably the most fun topic of the day. We're comparing winless teams. Vanderbilt Commodores, 2018, 2019, and the Mizzou Tigers. And I'm going to tell you, this battle was closer than you think. We're calling it the battle of the winless, but there's some talented players on both of these teams that we get to talk about. So that'll be right on the other side of this break. Thank you so much for listening to Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Blake and Jake Show, welcome into the very final segment of today's show. We get to talk a little bit about the battle of the winless. Now, we're talking Vanderbilt 2018-2019 versus the Missouri Tigers team that just lost their final game last week, ending them 0-18 in their conference play. That is the one thing that these two teams have in common. No other modern SEC team can really lay claim to an 0-18 record. And today, Jake and I thought it would be hilarious and exciting to go over, which team was better, which team. Let's get a real comparison of these two teams and what would be the matchup if we're to see them play each other. So we're going to start first a little bit, and I know that the Mizzou Tiger team is going to be fresher on people's minds. Don't worry about that. We'll go through each component of Vanderbilt as well. We're going to talk about the expectations from these two teams. Would you like to go ahead and start with your expectation of Mizzou?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start this off. So for Mizzou, prior to the season, there was a panel that was made up of SEC and the media. They ranked Mizzou 9th. So that could be pretty good for them. But before this season, Mizzou also lost their top 4 scorers in the previous season. So that includes Kobe Brown and Hodges, who both left to go play pro. So while they should have felt kind of confident, they had some reason to doubt themselves before the season began.
I agree, and I think that the general consensus around Mizzou was a little bit more positive than mine. I felt a little cup half empty because, yes, Dennis Gates brought in some interesting pieces through the transfer portal, but the investment that really mattered was made mostly into the guards. I know they got Connor Vanover from Oral Roberts, 7'5", averaged just under 12 minutes a game. So I'm pushing that aside. I'm talking about the players that garnered the most minutes off that transfer list were all guards. So I just don't know how Mizzou expected to have that same production despite Kobe Brown being a big reason for why that team was so successful last year, whether it be a rim protector that could still move well or a scorer and a passer as a big man while also being a decent rebounder. Des Moines Hodges with plenty of steals to make that a team category stat right there. That sets up the offense for the other side. That sets up transitions. The Mizzou just lacked all of that this year. The year prior, Mizzou was riding high off of Kobe Brown and Des Moines Hodges. Both prospects left for Los Angeles, though to different teams, into the bright lights of the NBA. There was an air of optimism, though, and I know it's a little bit of telling a story in the past, but there was optimism at the start of the season. There was 25-10 last season. And I think fans expected somewhere around 18 wins this season, if I was just to put a guess to it. I didn't have that same kind of faith in Mizzou, to be honest. But moving on to Vanderbilt, I doubt even fans of Vanderbilt want to remember the rough season in 2018. Head coach Bryce Drew was in his 3rd season. His seat was already hot due to regression out of the gates. The talent on the roster was quite shockingly NBA-level talent, though. They were young, but they were NBA talented. We're going to talk about a few of those. this young team had Darius Garland, who played for the Cavaliers. Now, only played 5 games, but they also had Saban Lee, Aaron Nesmith, and even Matt Ryan, who's found different contracts in the NBA. Now, the important thing to understand about this team was that there was no seniors on this team. There were only 3 juniors, and largely they were pretty ineffective when you looked at the stats per game and their averages in that. It was mostly on these young guys to produce. This is an interesting matchup, but Coach Bryce Drew, I want to go back to that real quick, had a ton of success coming into Vanderbilt, goes to Vanderbilt, struggles mightily, leaves, goes to Grand Canyon, has a lot of success, but in those 3 years, 19 wins, 12 wins, and then the total record of Vanderbilt after that season wasn't it 9 wins in his final season there? Yeah, the 9.
So, yeah.
Just 9 wins. Now, Jake, break down both of these teams before the season began. Which team should have felt the best going into the season?
Going into the season, I think it should have been Vanderbilt. Like I said before, they well, I didn't say this before, but they were ranked 8th in preseason predictions, whereas Mizzou was ranked 9th. And they had the talent. They had Darius Garland, who like you said played for the Cavs. They had the potential. They had the talent. They just couldn't get it done.
Now we're going to look at each one of the teams and how they did in their non-conference schedule. So we already broke out that both these teams went winless in their conference schedule, but how'd they do in their non-conference schedule? And Vanderbilt won a total of 9 games in their non-conference schedule. These 9 opponents went on to go 140 and 151 in 2018 for a total win percentage of 48%. Liberty and Arizona State would stand out among those victories. Liberty finished with a 29-7 record, and Arizona State would finish 23-11. Jake, go ahead and take away Mizzou's side of things.
Yeah, Mizzou ended up going 8-23 throughout the season, so they won 8 games non-conference. The top 2 teams that they played win record wise, they beat Pitt, who went 21-10, and they also beat Minnesota, who went 18-13.
Both teams, not terrible wins. Those are good wins at the top of their non-conference schedule, but they obviously struggle. That's why we're talking about both of these teams. Jake, I want to know we're going to talk a little bit about what made these teams struggle. We're talking about on the basketball and looking at how these teams struggled. Now, I kind of specialized in the Vanderbilt side of things today, and then I'll talk about what I saw from Mizzou this year. Vanderbilt, the one thing that they struggled with, Mizzou hasn't struggled to the same degree with, is defensive. And then, to be honest, that Vanderbilt team was an all-time defensively poor team. Just 154 steals, 126 blocks recorded for the season. Now, for reference, Mizzou had 376 assists last year to just 358 turnovers. That's like 200 and some odd more assists with 100 less turnovers. Mizzou also had 238 steals to Vanderbilt's 154. So I think it's almost a non-starter that Vanderbilt had a comparable defense. They didn't. Mizzou was much better defensively, regardless of the fact that Mizzou wasn't spectacular defensively this year. They were not all-time poor. Now, both teams lacked a contributing forward. It affects teams offensively and defensively when you do not have one. Kobe Brown last year was able to kind of fill a lot of that role. This year, I'm not exactly sure where Dennis Gates thought that kind of same role filling would come from. Who was going to step in to the shoes of Kobe Brown? Aiden Shaw had a great year defensively from the forward slot, and Connor shot great at points during the season from a forward position, but neither were able to do anything for the team, really. They weren't able to add a team value aspect. I don't think there was a single player on Mizzou that added a team value on offense. Now, both of these teams would kind of classify as one of those teams that, especially, and we're talking about when Darius Garland was out, played 5 games, went out. So I'm assuming that Darius Garland is out in these discussions that we're having. And without Darius Garland, both the teams fall behind rapidly when their shots aren't going down because they offer so little other than good shot making that if their shots weren't going down, it was like, what else did you have to impact the game?
Yeah, and shots didn't really often go down for either of these teams. I want to point out that so I know that the game is different. The game's always moving along, but during SEC play, Vanderbilt only scored 70 or more points 3 times. That's bad. Just to put that in comparison, like I said, I know that the game's changed a little bit, but Missouri, with how bad they were, they scored 70 or more points 9 times. So, that I think that just that one stat goes to show how bad offensively this Vanderbilt team was.
All right, Jake, I'm going to go ahead and throw this next question to you then first because it seems like you're ready to give your answer. How many games would it have taken for each team to get their first win in this scenario, this hypothetical? And I want you to tell me which team do you think would get the win first? I think
it's Missouri. Honestly, especially with Vanderbilt being without Darius Garland, I'm going to go with Missouri. They just looked just a little bit better offensively, excuse me. But either way, I don't think the win would be pretty because none of the games they played really seemed to be pretty games.
Yeah, I went back and forth on this. I really wanted to create a Vanderbilt discussion that would defeat your argument for Mizzou being the better of the 2 teams. And then I got down to work. And those defensive stats I found really just flattened my whole vibe on taking you down in this segment. And then Mizzou got blown out less. That's just what I noticed. Mizzou had a clear lack of firepower, capable of commanding a lead in SEC play. Yet Vanderbilt had the firepower available, but really lacked capable defenders that would make things difficult for opposing teams. With the assumption that freshman star Darius Garland stays injured, Mizzou wins that game in a hypothetical race. But to be honest, I don't think this ended poorly for really anybody on Vanderbilt. I know it was a terrible year and the numbers are going to look awful, and now they finally have some company on that winless conference record. So let's just take a look at that Vanderbilt team. Then we get to kind of talk about what could be in store for this Mizzou Tigers team. Looking back at that winless Vanderbilt team, things turned out pretty well. Coach Drew has now just helped Grand Canyon to a 27-4 record this year. They've improved every year under his 4-year tenure since he got there. Darius Garland, Aaron Neesmith, and Saban Lee have all found success. I put in the NFL here, but for the NBA, it's because Matt Ryan, not quarterback Matt Ryan, but basketball player Matt Ryan, has also garnered some NBA attention. And Simisola Shidu has found success in the Greek National League as well. So it feels like all of the main components of this Commodores team was able to go out and find success despite a pretty disastrous year in 2018. I'm going to talk to you, Jake, now. This is more hypothetical because we don't have we're just not in the future yet, Mm-hmm. So go ahead and tell me, what is the outlook for a lot of this current Mizzou Tigers team?
Well, Drew got fired after the season at Vanderbilt. I don't see Dennis Gates getting fired yet. We had that terrible season, but Mizzou has I believe it's the 4th best recruiting class for next year. So there's still some time for Mizzou to bounce back. But I think next year is going to be the real test. And if Dennis Gates and that Mizzou Tigers coaching staff very underperforms, then I don't think it's going to go well for him.
Yeah, there are a few graduatees, Nick Honor, Noah Carter, that will be moving on from this team to bigger and better things, hopefully. Yet, I like what you said. And let's talk about Dennis Gates in that coaching seat, because Coach Drew was fired after that year. And so why isn't Dennis Gates on that list? And it's simply because the year before, his first year, he goes 25-10. That's the most success that Mizzou's had in quite some time. And Mizzou loves its basketball, so if there's a team that's going to have success and go 25-10, Mizzou wants it to be its basketball team. This year, obviously, yes, the struggle, but as you had already brought up, quite the recruitment class coming in. You got Enor Boateng, 6'6", 210. Peyton Marshall, 7 foot 300. Marcus Allen, 6'6", 190. Trent Burns, 7'3", 210. And T.O. Barrett, 6'4", 180. All have signed their letter of intent. And a lot of these guys are top of the line players that the highest programs in college basketball were after, yet Dennis Gates was able to get him here. That's what probably holds on to his job. It makes his seat the coldest that it could be after a winless conference play record in the SEC. Except for, I mean, this is a lot of big talent, and this is exactly what Mizzou has been missing this year. The question is, was that the issue this year, or is Dennis Gates going to have some problems on his hand? Because right now he has the guards. I see him as having the guards, and I believe that while Sean East will be gone, we will be retaining the Iowa State product. Is that correct there? Given that Tamar Bates should be back next year as well to lead that guard group with all those fantastic small forwards and centers that are being recruited in this class. I think next year's a special year for Mizzou. I think best case, those guys really just start to get in. And even if Mizzou finishes with a 500 record, as long as there's certain points where Mizzou can say, I see growth, I think everything's all good. Yet, this is talent that Mizzou has not seen in a while. So if Dennis Gates cannot get something done with this talent, would it be fair to say that he might be out after next year?
Yes, if he can't get it done, and by get it done, I mean like improve in multiple aspects of the Tigers basketball. If he can't get that improvement, then I think he's gone.
You heard it there. You cannot end the season like this year, too many more years in a row, because all that negativity, it builds up. It gets that seat warmer and warmer. And no matter who you're bringing in, Dennis Gates, they will find somebody else to coach that talent. But I don't think that'll be a problem. I think this was a really tough year. And this was an honors class in the way that Dennis Gates is going to have to figure out all these different pieces that didn't really fit. I see the fit better next year, so I think it is more on Dennis Gates if he can't get the fit to work. But this year, I think it was more of a recruiting issue. I think some things fell through, and I don't think that Dennis Gates ended up with the team he wanted. That ends it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to Blake and Jake Show. That does it for the 9th episode. I invite listeners to be our very first followers on our newly created Instagram. That is the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you caught part of the show, but not the whole show, or maybe you want to hear the whole show over again, check us out on Spotify and YouTube at the Blake and Jake Show. The graphics that I've been making for that show have been hilarious.
Phenomenal.
With possible video coming soon to YouTube as well. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we see you next week for another episode of the Blake and Jake Show, possibly the mock draft show for the 10th ever show. That would be exciting. Blake and Jake Show, it happens Wednesdays at 2 on KCOU 88.1 FM. Thank you so much for listening.